Hollywood knows how to create stars, but it also knows how to destroy them. These women once had everything: fame, influence, admiration. They were the faces of success, the ones everyone loved. But then, something changed. A scandal, a moment caught on camera, or a reputation that slowly spread behind the scenes. And just like that, everything shifted. Fans turned into critics. Admiration turned into backlash. And the same spotlight that made them famous began exposing everything people questioned. So, what really happened? Who crossed the line so far that Hollywood never looked at them the same way again? And which of these actresses went from being loved to becoming some of the most disliked names in the industry? From shocking scandals, to careers damaged by perception, to controversies that divided millions. These are 20 actresses Hollywood couldn't protect, and in some cases, couldn't forgive. Let's start with number 20. 20. Lena Dunham. Lena Dunham didn't arrive in Hollywood the traditional way. She didn't wait for approval. She created her own spotlight. As the creator and star of Girls, she was quickly positioned as the voice of a generation, raw, unfiltered, and unapologetically honest in a way Hollywood wasn't used to. Critics praised her for saying the uncomfortable things, for exposing the messy reality behind modern relationships and identity. For a while, she wasn't just successful, she was seen as important. It felt like authenticity had finally broken through. But then, that same authenticity started to fracture. Dunham became the center of growing backlash after a series of controversial statements, comments about race, privilege, and personal experiences that many felt crossed a line. What she described as honesty, critics began calling tone-deaf, self-absorbed, and disconnected from reality. And the deeper people looked, the worse it seemed. Past interviews resurfaced, old writings were re-examined, moments that once passed quietly were suddenly amplified under a harsher lens. Then came one of the biggest turning points when she publicly defended a colleague facing serious allegations, without evidence, triggering a wave of outrage that spread far beyond Hollywood. That was the moment the narrative shifted. Not authentic, but reckless. Not fearless, but protected by privilege. Not a voice of a generation, but someone speaking over others. The public reaction was immediate and relentless. Social media turned on her. Critics who once praised her began distancing themselves, and the industry that once celebrated her boldness grew noticeably quieter. Lena Dunham didn't disappear, but the way people saw her changed permanently. Because in Hollywood, perception is everything. And once that perception cracks, it rarely goes back. Lena Dunham didn't lose her platform, but she became something else entirely. A reminder that saying everything on your mind doesn't always make you powerful. Sometimes, it just makes the world turn against you. 19. Rachel Zegler. Rachel Zegler's rise in Hollywood was almost too perfect. She went from posting singing videos online to landing the lead role in West Side Story, directed by Steven Spielberg. Critics praised her talent. Audiences saw a fresh face with real potential. She wasn't just another newcomer, she was being positioned as the future. And then, she became the center of one of Disney's biggest controversies in years. When Zegler was cast as Snow White in Disney's live-action remake, the attention was massive. But instead of playing it safe, she chose to speak openly about the original film, calling it outdated, criticizing its themes, and suggesting the new version would be very different. What she likely intended as modernizing the story didn't land that way. To many fans, it felt disrespectful. Clips of her interviews spread rapidly online. Every comment was dissected. The more she tried to explain, the worse the backlash seemed to grow. What should have been excitement for a major role turned into a debate about arrogance, entitlement, and misunderstanding the very audience she was supposed to win over. And it didn't stop there. Her public statements on social issues, combined with her blunt interview style, made her a constant target. Supporters defended her honesty, critics labeled her ungrateful and out of touch. The divide became impossible to ignore. Rachel Zegler didn't commit a crime. She didn't have a scandal in the traditional sense. But in Hollywood, perception can be just as damaging. Because sometimes, it only takes a few words, spoken at the wrong moment, to the wrong audience, to change everything. She entered the industry as a rising star. But almost overnight, she became one of its most polarizing new faces. And in a system built on public approval, that can be just as dangerous as any scandal. 18. Brie Larson. Brie Larson didn't just rise in Hollywood, she conquered it. By the time she won the Academy Award for Room, she was already respected. But when she stepped into the role of Captain Marvel, she became something even bigger, one of the most powerful faces in the Marvel universe. It should have been a moment that cemented her as universally admired. Instead, it marked the beginning of a backlash she never fully escaped. It started with a speech. Larson spoke about diversity in film criticism, calling for more inclusion and representation in the industry. On paper, it aligned with broader cultural conversations. But the way it was delivered and interpreted sparked immediate controversy. Clips spread, quotes were taken out of context, and also amplified. To supporters, she was advocating for change. To critics, she came across as dismissive, confrontational, even arrogant. And once the narrative shifted, everything else followed. Her interviews were scrutinized. Her interactions with co-stars were analyzed frame by frame. Moments that might have been ignored before were now used as proof of a growing perception that she wasn't just confident, but difficult. Online, the reaction exploded. Review bombing campaigns targeted her films. Social media turned into a battleground, and Brie Larson became one of the most talked about and divisive actresses of her generation. What made it worse was how quickly it escalated. There was no single scandal, no arrest, no lawsuit, no career-ending mistake. Just a series of moments, interpreted through a lens that kept getting harsher. Brie Larson didn't lose her success. She didn't disappear from Hollywood. But she became something far more complicated. A symbol of how quickly public opinion can turn when confidence is seen as arrogance, and a message becomes a controversy. Because, in Hollywood, it doesn't always take a scandal to be hated. Sometimes, it just takes a narrative that people decide to believe. 17. Anne Hathaway. Anne Hathaway's career followed a script Hollywood usually rewards. She started as the charming newcomer in The Princess Diaries, transitioned into serious roles, and proved her range with performances that critics couldn't ignore. By the time she won the Academy Award for Les Miserables, she had done everything right. Talent, discipline, respect. On paper, she was exactly what Hollywood is supposed to celebrate. But then, something strange happened. People started turning on her. There was no scandal, no crime, no explosive controversy. Just a growing feeling that something about her didn't feel genuine. Her acceptance speeches, emotional, grateful, carefully worded, were suddenly labeled as rehearsed. Interviews that once felt polished were now described as calculated. Even her enthusiasm began to be interpreted as performance rather than sincerity. And the internet gave it a name: How to Hate. It spread quietly at first. Then it became unavoidable. Late-night hosts joked about her. Online forums dissected her every expression. Comment sections filled with criticism that didn't always have a clear reason, only a shared conclusion. She was trying too hard. What made it more unsettling was how vague it all was. Anne Hathaway hadn't changed dramatically, but the way people perceived her had. In Hollywood, that shift can be devastating. Because when the audience decides you're not authentic anymore, every word you say starts sounding scripted. The backlash didn't erase her career. She continued working, continued succeeding. But the image had cracked. Anne Hathaway became a reminder of something uncomfortable. In Hollywood, you don't need to do something wrong to be disliked. Sometimes, being too perfect is enough. And once that narrative takes hold, it's almost impossible to control how the world sees you again. 16. Gwyneth Paltrow. Gwyneth Paltrow was once the definition of classic Hollywood elegance. She moved through the industry with quiet confidence, delivering performances that earned critical acclaim and, eventually, an Academy Award for Shakespeare in Love. For years, she represented refinement, intelligence, a kind of effortless prestige that few could match. But then, she stepped away from acting and built something far more controversial. Her lifestyle brand, Goop, started as a simple newsletter, recommendations about wellness, beauty, and living better. But it didn't stay simple for long. It grew into a multi-million-dollar empire selling products and advice that promised transformation. And that's where everything began to shift. Doctors, scientists, and critics started pushing back. Some of the products, like jade eggs or detox treatments, were widely labeled as pseudoscience. Claims were questioned. Lawsuits followed. What she presented as alternative wellness others saw as misinformation sold at a premium price. And the criticism wasn't just about products. It was about tone. Paltrow's interviews often carried a sense of detachment, comments that highlighted just how far removed her life was from ordinary people. Comparing her struggles to far more serious realities only deepened the divide. The image of elegance turned into something else. Elitism, privilege, a celebrity selling an idea of perfection that felt impossible and, to many, irresponsible. The reaction was intense. Some admired her business instincts, but many more questioned her credibility. Gwyneth Paltrow didn't disappear. In fact, she became more powerful than ever. But the way people saw her changed completely. She was no longer just an actress. She became a symbol of how influence can be used to shape belief, sell ideas, and blur the line between truth and image. Because in Hollywood, reinvention can make you richer, but it can also make you one of the most criticized figures in the industry. And sometimes, success only amplifies the backlash. 15. Amber Heard. Amber Heard's career was building exactly the way Hollywood likes to see. She had the look, the roles, and the kind of rising visibility that suggested something bigger was coming. With films like Aquaman, she was stepping into blockbuster territory, positioning herself as a leading actress with global recognition. And then, everything became about something else. Her relationship with Johnny Depp turned into one of the most public and divisive legal battles Hollywood had ever seen. At first, when Heard accused Depp of abuse, public sympathy leaned toward her. The narrative seemed clear, but as the defamation trial unfolded, that clarity disappeared. Recordings, testimonies, and cross-examinations revealed a far more complicated situation. Details surfaced that challenged the initial perception. Clips spread across social media at an unprecedented scale, turning courtroom moments into viral content. And the public reaction shifted fast. Hashtags trended globally. Memes flooded every platform. Millions of viewers began forming opinions in real time, watching the trial almost like entertainment. To supporters, she remained a victim speaking out. To critics, she became something else entirely. Manipulative, unreliable, a figure who had lost control of the narrative. What made it different was the scale. This wasn't just a scandal reported in headlines. It played out live, day after day, in front of the entire world. And in that kind of spotlight, perception becomes permanent. Amber Heard didn't just face legal consequences. She faced something Hollywood fears even more: a complete collapse of public trust. Projects were questioned. Her role in major franchises became uncertain, and her name became tied less to her work and more to the controversy that consumed it. Amber Heard's story is no longer about a rising actress. It's about how quickly a career can be overtaken by a narrative, and how impossible it is to take control back once the world has already decided who you are. Because in Hollywood, it's not always the truth that defines you. Sometimes, it's the version of the story people choose to believe. 14. Dakota Johnson. Dakota Johnson didn't fight her way into Hollywood. She was born into it. As the daughter of Melanie Griffith and Don Johnson, she already had a last name the industry recognized. But when she landed the lead role in 50 Shades of Grey, she proved she could carry a global franchise on her own. Fame came fast. Attention came even faster. For a while, Dakota Johnson was everywhere: magazines, premieres, interviews. She built a reputation for being calm, dry, even slightly detached, which made her feel different from the typical Hollywood personality. But then, one interview changed everything. Her appearance on Ellen DeGeneres' show went viral, but not for the usual reasons. In a moment that seemed small at first, Dakota quietly corrected Ellen on air, calling out a claim about not being invited to her birthday party. It was subtle, almost polite, but it exposed something deeper. The clip spread everywhere. People replayed it, analyzed it, slowed it down. Suddenly, it wasn't just an awkward exchange. It became a glimpse behind the curtain. Viewers began questioning Ellen's image. But at the same time, Dakota's own persona came under scrutiny. Some saw her as honest. Others saw her as cold, passive-aggressive, even disrespectful. And once that perception started forming, it didn't stop there. Her dry humor in interviews, once charming, began to feel uncomfortable. Her detached responses were interpreted as arrogance. Moments that might have gone unnoticed before were now framed differently. Dakota Johnson didn't have a major scandal. No arrests, no lawsuits. But she had something Hollywood understands very well. A viral moment that reshaped how people saw her. She remained successful. She continued working. But the image shifted. From mysterious to distant. From composed to unapproachable. Dakota Johnson became a reminder of something subtle but powerful. In Hollywood, you don't always lose control through a scandal. Sometimes, it happens in a single conversation. And once millions of people see that moment, they don't forget it. 13. Katherine Heigl. Katherine Heigl had everything Hollywood looks for. She was the breakout star of Grey's Anatomy, loved by audiences, praised by critics, and backed by a hit show that turned her into a household name. When she transitioned into films like Knocked Up and 27 Dresses, it felt like the next step toward becoming one of the industry's most reliable leading actresses. For a moment, she was exactly where everyone wants to be, at the top. But then, she started speaking, and Hollywood started listening differently. Heigl openly criticized Knocked Up, calling parts of it sexist. What she may have intended as honest reflection was taken as biting the very project that elevated her career. The reaction was immediate. Co-stars responded. The director pushed back. The narrative began to shift. And it didn't stop there. She later withdrew her name from Emmy consideration for Grey's Anatomy, saying she hadn't been given material worthy of a nomination. To her, it may have sounded like integrity. To the industry, it sounded like arrogance. That moment changed everything. Rumors spread quickly. Difficult to work with. Demanding. Unappreciative. Whether those claims were exaggerated or not, they stuck. And in Hollywood, reputation travels faster than truth. Casting directors hesitated. Producers pulled back. Opportunities that once came easily started disappearing. The fall wasn't explosive. It was quiet, but decisive. Katherine Heigl didn't lose her talent. She didn't suddenly become a worse actress. But she lost something far more important. Goodwill. And once that's gone, it's almost impossible to rebuild. Her story became a warning. Not about scandal, but about perception. Because in Hollywood, it's not just what you say, it's how the industry hears it. And sometimes, one honest comment can cost you an entire career trajectory. 12. Megan Fox. Megan Fox didn't just enter Hollywood, she exploded into it. With Transformers, she became one of the most recognizable faces in the world almost overnight. Her look, her presence, her screen appeal, it all fit perfectly into the blockbuster machine. Magazines called her the next big thing. Studios saw a future leading star. For a moment, she was everywhere. And then, she said something she couldn't take back. In an interview, Fox compared director Michael Bay to a dictator, describing his behavior on set in a way that quickly made headlines. It wasn't a quiet comment. It was blunt, direct, and impossible to ignore. What might have been seen as honesty was received as disrespect. The reaction was immediate. Behind the scenes, relationships shifted. Publicly, the narrative changed. Instead of being seen as a rising star standing up for herself, she was labeled difficult, unprofessional, ungrateful. And Hollywood doesn't respond well to that label. Soon after, she was removed from the Transformers franchise, the very platform that made her famous. The message was clear, even if it was never officially stated. She had crossed a line. The backlash didn't stop there. Interviews were picked apart. Her confidence was reframed as arrogance. Her image shifted from desirable to controversial. And once that shift happened, it followed her everywhere. Roles became harder to secure. Opportunities slowed down. The industry that once pushed her forward stepped back. Years later, Megan Fox spoke about the experience, about feeling targeted, misunderstood, and caught in a system that punished her for speaking out. Some audiences began to see her differently, but the damage had already been done. Megan Fox didn't lose her talent. She didn't disappear completely, but she became something Hollywood rarely forgives. A star who challenged the system too early. And, in an industry built on power and perception, that can be enough to turn admiration into resistance. Because sometimes, the fall doesn't come from failure. It comes from saying the wrong thing, to the wrong people, at exactly the wrong time. 11. Lindsay Lohan. Lindsay Lohan wasn't just a rising star. She was the star. From The Parent Trap to Mean Girls, she carried films with a mix of charm and sharp comedic timing that felt effortless. Hollywood didn't just see potential in her, it built around her. By her late teens, she was already a defining face of an entire generation. For a while, it seemed unstoppable. And then, everything began to unravel. It didn't happen all at once. First, it was the headlines, late nights, parties, paparazzi following her every move. Then came the arrests, charges related to driving under the influence, court appearances, mugshots that spread across the internet faster than any movie promotion ever could. The narrative shifted, and it didn't stop. Rehab stints became part of the story. Court dates replaced red carpets. Her name started appearing more in legal reports than film credits. And Hollywood noticed. Directors began to question her reliability. Studios hesitated to ensure productions involving her. Producers quietly moved on to safer choices. The problem wasn't just the scandals. It was the pattern. Late arrivals, missed days, reports of chaotic behavior behind the scenes. Whether every detail was true or not, the perception solidified. Unpredictable, unstable, too risky. For an industry that runs on schedules and budgets, that reputation is almost impossible to recover from. What made it more difficult was how public it all became. Every mistake was documented, every setback amplified, every attempt to come back compared to who she used to be. Lindsay Lohan didn't lose her talent. She didn't lose the audience completely, but she lost momentum. And in Hollywood, momentum is everything. She became less of a leading actress and more of a cautionary story about what happens when early fame collides with pressure, exposure, and a system that rarely slows down for anyone. Because in the end, it wasn't one scandal that changed her career. It was all of them, stacking up, one after another, until the industry stopped waiting for her to catch up. 10. Lea Michele. Lea Michele's rise looked like pure momentum. As the breakout star of Glee, she wasn't just part of the show, she was the center of it. Her voice, her presence, her performances, everything pointed to a long, dominant career ahead. To audiences, she was talented, driven, and impossible to ignore. For a while, that image held. And then, the stories started surfacing. It didn't come from tabloids at first. It came from people who had worked with her. Former co-stars began speaking out, sharing experiences that painted a very different picture of what it was like behind the scenes. Allegations of bullying, intimidation, and toxic behavior on set quickly spread across social media. And once it started, it didn't stop. More voices joined in. More details were shared, and the narrative became harder to dismiss. What had once been seen as ambition was now being described as cruelty. Professionalism turned into control. Confidence turned into ego. The contrast was impossible to ignore. On screen, she was the polished performer. Off-screen, she was being portrayed as someone difficult, someone others struggled to work with. The backlash was immediate. Brands distanced themselves. Projects quietly shifted direction. And her reputation, built over years, began to change almost overnight. Lea Michele responded publicly, issuing an apology, acknowledging that her behavior had been hurtful. But in Hollywood, apologies don't always ruin perception, especially when multiple people are telling the same story. The damage wasn't just about what happened. It was about how consistently it was described. Lea Michele didn't lose her talent. She didn't disappear completely, but she lost control of her image. And once that image is defined by others, it's incredibly difficult to take it back. Because in Hollywood, success can elevate you, but your reputation decides how long you stay there. And sometimes, the fall doesn't come from the spotlight. It comes from what happens when the cameras aren't rolling. 9. Loughlin. Loughlin's image was built on trust. For years, she was known as Aunt Becky from Full House, warm, reliable, familiar. She wasn't controversial. She wasn't divisive. She represented something rare in Hollywood: consistency. That image didn't just help her career. It defined it. And then, it collapsed. In one of the most shocking scandals to hit the industry, Loughlin became involved in the college admissions scheme, paying large sums of money to secure her daughter's entry into a prestigious university. It wasn't rumor. It wasn't speculation. It was documented. Federal charges followed. Court appearances became public events. And suddenly, The actress known for wholesome roles was at the center of a nationwide controversy. The reaction was immediate and unforgiving. Fans felt betrayed. Brands cut ties. Networks removed her from ongoing projects. The disconnect was too stark. A woman who built her career on trust, now accused of abusing privilege. And in this case, there was no ambiguity. Loughlin pleaded guilty. She served time in prison. And the story became one of the clearest examples of how quickly status can unravel. What made it hit harder was what she represented. This wasn't reckless behavior. It wasn't a moment of emotional loss of control. It was calculated, a decision made with intention, in a system that already favored people like her. That's what shifted public opinion so dramatically. Lori Loughlin didn't just damage her reputation. She became a symbol of privilege taken too far, of fairness being bypassed, of a system people were already questioning. Her career didn't disappear overnight, but it changed permanently. Because in Hollywood, you can recover from mistakes, but it's much harder to recover from breaking trust. And once that trust is gone, no role, no performance, no comeback can fully restore what people believed you were. 8. Roseanne Barr. Roseanne Barr didn't just succeed in Hollywood. She built something that felt untouchable. Her sitcom Roseanne was a cultural force, raw, direct, and unapologetically honest about working-class life. She wasn't polished, and that was the point. Audiences connected with her because she said things others wouldn't. For decades, that boldness was her strength. And then, it became her downfall. In a single moment, one tweet changed everything. Barr posted a comment that was widely condemned as racist. It spread instantly: screenshots, headlines, reactions. There was no time for context, no slow build-up, just impact. The backlash was immediate. Networks responded within hours. Her show revived, and Performing Strongly was canceled. Years of work erased almost overnight. It wasn't a quiet fallout. It was public, fast, and decisive. To some, it was accountability. To others, it was cancellation at its most extreme. But what mattered was the shift. The same unfiltered voice that once made her famous now defined her in a completely different way. And there was no controlling it. Apologies followed. Explanations were given. But the narrative had already locked in. In Hollywood, timing is everything. And this happened at a moment when public tolerance for that kind of controversy had reached its limit. Roseanne Barr didn't lose her platform gradually. She lost it instantly. That's what made it so striking. No long decline. No slow distancing. Just one post. And a career was fundamentally altered. She remains a figure people recognize. But the way she is remembered has changed. From groundbreaking comedian to one of the clearest examples of how fast Hollywood can turn. Because in an industry built on image, it doesn't always take a pattern. Sometimes, it only takes one moment. 7. Gal Gadot. Gal Gadot's rise looked almost effortless. With Wonder Woman, she became the face of one of the most iconic superheroes in history. Audiences admired her strength, her presence, the way she carried a character that symbolized power and hope. For a moment, she felt universally liked, rare, in an industry built on division. And then, the perception started to shift. It didn't begin with a scandal. It began with a moment meant to inspire. During a global crisis, Gadot joined a group of celebrities in a video singing "Imagine," a message intended to bring unity and comfort. But instead of admiration, the reaction was overwhelmingly negative. The tone felt disconnected. The message felt hollow. And the backlash was immediate. Clips spread rapidly. Criticism flooded social media. What was meant to feel uplifting was seen as out of touch. And that was just the beginning. Her public statements on political issues began drawing sharper reactions. Some supported her. Others strongly disagreed. The divide became clear. For an actress who once felt widely accepted, she became increasingly polarizing. And in Hollywood, that shift matters. Because once audiences start questioning authenticity, every action is viewed differently. Her performances were still there. Her roles didn't disappear. But the image changed. From universally admired to constantly debated, Gal Gadot didn't face a single defining scandal. She faced something more subtle, but just as powerful. A slow shift in perception. And once that shift happens, it rarely reverses completely. Because in Hollywood, being loved by everyone is temporary, but becoming polarizing can last much longer. Sometimes, it's not one mistake that changes everything. It's a series of moments that slowly turn admiration into criticism. 6. Angelina Jolie. Angelina Jolie wasn't just a movie star. She was an institution. From Girl, Interrupted to Mr. and Mrs. Smith, she built an image that blended talent, intensity, and global fame. She wasn't only admired for her acting, she became a humanitarian figure, a symbol of influence far beyond Hollywood. For years, she seemed untouchable. And then, her personal life became the story. Her relationship with Brad Pitt had already been one of the most talked about in the world. It began under controversy during the collapse of his previous marriage and was followed obsessively by the media. But the real shift came later. Their divorce didn't just end a relationship. It opened a long, complicated, and highly public conflict. Allegations surfaced. Legal battles extended for years. Details about family disputes, custody disagreements, and private incidents began appearing in headlines. And once again, the public split. Some saw Jolie as protective, standing her ground. Others questioned the narrative, viewing the situation differently. The problem wasn't just the conflict itself. It was how visible it became. Every development was reported. Every claim debated. Every silence interpreted. And in that kind of exposure, there's no controlling the story. The image she had carefully built, strong, composed, humanitarian, became entangled in something far more complicated. Not broken, but no longer clear. Angelina Jolie didn't lose her influence. She didn't disappear from Hollywood, but she became something else. A figure defined as much by controversy as by achievement. Because in Hollywood, the line between personal life and public image doesn't exist. And once that line is crossed, everything becomes part of the narrative. Sometimes, it's not a scandal that changes how people see you. It's a story that never fully ends. 5. Kristen Stewart. Kristen Stewart's rise was instant and overwhelming. With Twilight, she became one of the most recognizable faces in the world. The franchise wasn't just successful, it was a phenomenon. Fans were obsessed, media attention was constant, and at the center of it all was her. For a moment, she wasn't just an actress. She was everywhere. And then, everything changed in a single headline. Photos surfaced showing Stewart in a relationship with director Rupert Sanders while she was still publicly dating her Twilight co-star Robert Pattinson. There was no ambiguity. The images spread instantly. Tabloids exploded. The story dominated entertainment news across the world, and the reaction was immediate. Fans felt betrayed. The carefully built image of a real-life romance, something the audience had invested in, collapsed overnight. But what made it worse was how public it all became. This wasn't rumor. This wasn't speculation. It was visible. And in Hollywood, visibility changes everything. Stewart issued a public apology. The relationship ended. But the damage didn't stop there. Her personality, already seen as reserved, was now interpreted differently. Interviews felt more distant. Her on-screen roles were viewed through a new lens. The narrative had shifted from introverted to cold, from private to unfaithful. And once that narrative takes hold, it spreads. Kristen Stewart didn't lose her career. In fact, she later rebuilt it with critically acclaimed roles. But that moment stayed with her. Because in Hollywood, certain scandals don't disappear. They follow you. No matter how much time passes, no matter how much you evolve. Kristen Stewart became a reminder of something harsh. In the spotlight, personal mistakes don't stay personal. They become part of your identity. And sometimes, one moment is enough to change how the world sees you forever. 4. Jennifer Lawrence. Jennifer Lawrence didn't just become famous. She became relatable. From The Hunger Games to her Academy Award win, she built an image that felt different from traditional Hollywood stars. She tripped on red carpets, joked in interviews, spoke without filters. Audiences didn't just admire her, they felt like they knew her. For a while, that authenticity worked perfectly. And then, it started to feel different. The same personality that once made her refreshing began to feel calculated. Interviews that used to seem spontaneous were now described as rehearsed. Moments meant to be funny were interpreted as attention-seeking. The image of the girl who doesn't try too hard slowly turned into someone critics believed was trying very hard to appear that way. And once that perception formed, it grew. Every public appearance was analyzed. Every joke was questioned. Every story was picked apart. Then came the controversies. Old clips resurfaced comments that some viewers considered inappropriate or insensitive. What might have passed unnoticed before now fed into a broader narrative that had already started forming. Not relatable, but performative. Not genuine, but constructed. The shift wasn't explosive. There was no single scandal that ended everything. Instead, it was gradual, but persist. The more people saw her, the more divided the reactions became. Jennifer Lawrence didn't lose her success. She didn't disappear, but the connection she once had with audiences changed. Because in Hollywood, relatability is fragile. The moment it feels forced, it stops working. She went from being the actress everyone loved to someone people debated. And that difference matters. Because sometimes, the fall doesn't come from doing something wrong. It comes from the audience deciding they don't believe you anymore. 3. Scarlett Johansson. Scarlett Johansson built her career on control. From indie films to global blockbusters, she managed to move between worlds without losing credibility. She was respected by critics, bankable for studios, and widely recognized as one of Hollywood's most consistent leading actresses. For years, she avoided major controversy. And then, casting choices changed that. It started with Ghost in the Shell. Johansson was cast as a character originally written as Japanese. The backlash was immediate. Critics accused the film of whitewashing, a long-standing issue in Hollywood, where roles tied to specific cultures are given to white actors. The conversation grew quickly. What could have been a single casting debate became part of a larger cultural argument. And Johansson was at the center of it. But it didn't end there. She was later cast in a project where she would have portrayed a transgender character. Once again, criticism surged. Advocacy groups spoke out. Social media intensified the pressure. This time, the response escalated faster. Johansson eventually stepped away from the role. But the damage had already been done. The narrative had shifted from versatile actress to someone perceived as out of touch with the conversations happening around her. What made it more complicated was her response. In defending her choices, Johansson argued for artistic freedom, suggesting actors should be able to play any role. To some, it made sense. To others, it sounded dismissive. And once again, perception took over. There was no crime, no personal scandal, just decisions that placed her in the middle of cultural debates Hollywood couldn't ignore. Scarlett Johansson didn't lose her career. She remained one of the industry's biggest names. But the way people saw her changed. Because in Hollywood today, it's not just about talent. It's about awareness. And when those expectations shift, even the most established stars can find themselves on the wrong side of the conversation. Sometimes, it's not what you do on screen that defines your image. It's the roles you choose and how the world reacts to them. 2. Emma Watson. Emma Watson grew up in front of the world and earned its respect. As Hermione Granger in Harry Potter, she became a symbol of intelligence, strength, and integrity. But unlike many child stars, she didn't fade after the spotlight shifted. She evolved. Education, activism, public speaking. She built an image that felt thoughtful, intentional, almost untouchable. For a while, she wasn't just admired. She was trusted. And then, that trust started to fracture. It didn't come from a scandal in the traditional sense. It came from expectations. Watson became one of the most visible voices for feminism in Hollywood. Her speeches, campaigns, and public appearances positioned her as a leader in conversations about equality and representation. But with visibility came scrutiny. Critics began questioning her message. Some argued her activism felt selective, highlighting certain issues while staying silent on others. Others pointed to moments where her statements seemed disconnected from the realities she was speaking about. And once that narrative began, it expanded. Interviews were re-examined. Public appearances were analyzed. Every word carried more weight and more criticism. The shift was subtle, but real. From inspiring to idealistic. From thoughtful to out of touch. Supporters continued to defend her. But the divide became clearer. Emma Watson didn't do something shocking. She didn't face legal trouble or a career-ending scandal. But in Hollywood, influence creates pressure. And the more you represent something, the more people expect consistency. She didn't lose her career. She didn't lose her platform. But the image changed. Because in the spotlight, even good intentions are questioned. And once people begin to doubt your message, they start to question everything around it. Emma Watson became a reminder of something complicated. In Hollywood, being admired for what you stand for also means being judged for how perfectly you live up to it. And sometimes, that standard is impossible to meet. 1. Julia Roberts. Julia Roberts was once untouchable. She wasn't just a movie star. She was the movie star. From Pretty Woman to Notting Hill, she defined an era where charisma alone could carry a film. Audiences loved her smile. Studios trusted her name. Oh, for years, she represented the idea of Hollywood at its brightest. She wasn't controversial. She wasn't divisive. She was safe. And then, the image started to crack. It didn't begin with a single scandal. It was a series of moments quiet at first, but impossible to ignore over time. Her personal relationships became public in ways that didn't align with the image she had built. One incident in particular drew intense attention: her relationship with a married man, which quickly turned into tabloid headlines that followed her everywhere. The story wasn't just about romance. It was about perception. The woman once seen as America's sweetheart, now placed at the center of controversy. And that shift stayed. Behind the scenes, reports began circulating. Difficult, demanding, hard to work with. Whether exaggerated or not, those labels spread. And in Hollywood, once a reputation takes hold, it rarely disappears. What made it more complicated was the contrast. On screen, she remained charming, approachable, effortless. Off-screen, the narrative felt different, controlled, distant, guarded. The gap between those two images became harder to ignore. Julia Roberts didn't lose her career. She didn't fall in the dramatic way others did. But something changed. The universal admiration faded. In its place came something more measured, more cautious. Because in Hollywood, even the safest image can shift. Not from one explosive moment, but from a series of choices that slowly reshape how the public sees you. Julia Roberts remained a star, but she also became a reminder that even the most beloved figures aren't immune to scrutiny. And sometimes, the fall isn't loud. It's quiet. It's gradual. And by the time people notice, the image they once believed in is already gone. Hollywood creates stars, but it also keeps score. The 20 women on this list didn't all fall the same way. Some were pulled down by scandals that exploded overnight. Others saw their image slowly unravel, piece by piece, moment by moment. But in the end, the result felt the same. Admiration turned into doubt. Respect turned into criticism. And the spotlight that once elevated them began exposing everything people questioned. Because in Hollywood, talent isn't the only thing that matters. Image matters. Timing matters. And most of all, perception matters. Some of these actresses are still successful. Some are rebuilding. Some never fully recovered. But all of them prove one thing. Fame is fragile. And once the audience changes how they see you, there's no guarantee you'll ever get that version of yourself back. So now the question is, who do you think was judged the most unfairly? And who do you think deserved the backlash they received? Let me know in the comments. Because in Hollywood, every story has more than one version. And sometimes, the truth depends on who you believe.